The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 3. The Prisons and the Promise. August 19th, 1991. Must I really have dinner with these Muggles, Father? Surely there is some other way to get them on our side. Wasn't the reception enough? Draco's protest fell on deaf ears. Lucius had been a nervous wreck since the night of the reception, 2 weeks prior, and he would have none of it. If there was a chance of their own and Draco's survival, they must ingratiate themselves with the Grangers. Silence! You did not hear this man. There was talk of rejoining the Dark Lord's army, of children taking up arms, of slitting throats, of trench warfare. Lucius truthfully had no idea what trench warfare meant, nor did the Malfoy library. However, it sounded atrocious, and he was not keen to find out. Fine, Draco grumbled. I only hope their house elves are more adept at cooking than they are at welcoming guests. Eustace and I stood there for nearly 30 seconds, waiting for someone to receive us, you know. Lucius struggled not to roll his eyes at Draco's proclamation. The boy really did live a sheltered life, he thought. It was an ordinary Wednesday evening, 2 weeks before the start of term at Hogwarts. Mere days after the reception, Linda had used the loner owl that the Malfoys had provided to contact Narcissa. She'd wished to discuss meals and sleeping arrangements at Hogwarts Castle. This started a nearly daily discourse between the two women, which resulted in Draco garnering an invitation to the Grangers' home for dinner. Now, it was nearly 6 in the evening, the time that the Grangers expected him, and Draco was nervous, something he'd never want to admit to his father. He smoothed his hands over his hair one final time, then stepped to the hearth. "You're sure they won't hurt me?" Draco asked in a small voice, now that the moment was nigh. Lucius faltered. In truth, he wasn't certain. Richard seemed affable enough, it was true, but the Dark Lord himself had seemed cordial, even friendly, when Lucius had first known him. "I believe you will be safe," Lucius finally answered. "And it is for the best if you go alone. My presence may be perceived as a challenge to the man, and besides, his defences may be lowered around you. Perhaps he will reveal something to you that he might have kept hidden from me. Yes," he finished as though trying to convince himself. "Yes, Draco, you must do this alone." "Fine," Draco grumbled. He took a pinch of flu powder and a deep breath and called out, "Heathgate 16, Hampstead." "So, Draco, are you looking forward to starting at Hogwarts? Have you visited the school before?" Linda Granger asked kindly. "Yes. My father is on the Board of Governors, so we visit once a year or so." Draco took another bite of his meal, amazed at how delicious it was. "I must say, Lady Granger, your elves have outdone themselves." Linda looked at him blankly. "My what?" "Your elves. This meal is delicious. To be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect." "Ah, yes. Well, I will be sure to pass on the word to the, elves at Hunane Garden." Linda smiled into her paper napkin. "Their elves really do have such nimble little fingers, don't they? To be able to get those little slips of paper inside of those fortune cookies." Richard fixed his wife with a mirthful glance. "Dad," Hermione said warningly. "Just kidding, crab cake." He turned to Draco. "So, Draco, do you like football? I've got a good one for you. Why was the half-man, half-horse so good at football?" "Sorry?" Draco asked in confusion. "Because he was the centaur forward." Richard grinned maniacally at Draco, but Draco didn't smile back. "Are you in touch with the centaurs, then?" This was valuable information that his father likely didn't know. We were talking about football," Richard said bemusedly. "Sorry, I have no idea what that is," Draco said politely. "Really? Well, if you like, we can watch—" Richard began eagerly, but was interrupted by Hermione. "Dad, Mum and I really don't want to watch football tonight. How about a film instead?"
"All right, you win, Crabcake."
Draco inhaled sharply at how quickly and easily Richard acquiesced to his daughter's demands. He wondered if all Muggles were like this, or if it was because Hermione was as vital to the cause as his father thought she was. Or was it just because she was her? It was quite clear to Draco, after spending a couple of evenings now with Hermione, that she was quite bright. He had always thought of himself as rather intelligent, had always been told this by his parents and tutors, but she was clearly head and shoulders above him. She had obviously devoured most of her textbooks already. Half the time, when either of the Grangers posed a question to Draco about the magical world, it was Hermione that answered. And she was animated, excited about things. She didn't seem to be satisfied with only knowing about parts of things. She needed all of it. When dinner was over, Richard and Linda cleared the table whilst Hermione took Draco into the living room to find something to watch. "What kinds of entertainment do you like?" she asked. "Cartoons? Aladdin? No, I'm not in the mood. Not Hocus Pocus. That's a little too on the nose and possibly offensive. Star Wars? That might take too long to explain. Or, what about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? That's a fun one." 2 hours on, Draco was as nervous as Lucius had been at the reception for the Grangers. Muggles might not have wands, but with the ability to shrink human beings to the size of insects, they didn't need them. And with his curly brown hair and thick glasses, Lord Granger looked a whole lot like the Muggle man inside the little box who had been responsible for shrinking his children. It wasn't hard for Draco to picture himself shrunk down to nothing, drowning in a glass of water. After the film, Draco sat on the sofa, trying to control his breathing. He did not wish to show fear, and yet he knew it was written all over his face.
"Oh dear,"
Linda said after taking one look at him.
"It's all right, Draco. It was just a made-up story."
As though Draco would believe that. Clearly the shrinking had happened. Otherwise, what had they just seen? He watched with suspicion as the little box atop the larger box whirred loudly. Then Richard pressed a button on the little box and a rectangular black object popped out. Written clearly along the edge of the black object were the titular words from this film. This, then, must be where the miniaturized people were stored. He watched with trepidation as Richard stowed the black rectangle inside of its own colourful box on a shelf, which Draco now realized was filled with several dozen others. Were all of these small prisons, then? Did every Muggle have a small prison sitting on a shelf in their home, its own little self-contained world? Was he currently sitting in a small prison on a small shelf within someone's home, unaware of his shrunken existence? As Draco quietly and desperately contemplated this intensely stressful existential crisis, Hermione and Linda were discussing dessert.
"The Eve's pudding should be about done by now, sweet, if you can mix up a bit of custard."
"Sure, Mum. Draco, do you like Eve's pudding?" Born with an insatiable sweet tooth, Draco could always eat pudding. His mind was torn. Do everything he could to escape this Muggle house of horrors, or eat pudding with them. Eve's pudding, you say? What's that?" His mouth was saying before his mind had a chance to intervene.
"It's just an apple dessert with a bit of cake and custard."
That decided it, then. "I love it," he responded. 20 minutes later, Draco was contemplating whether life inside of a small box on a shelf would be so horrible if he were given this dessert at every meal. As he scooped up the final bit of his 4th helping, he made eye contact with Hermione across the table and gave her a small smile. She smiled back shyly, the corners of her eyes crinkling over the rim of her glass of milk. Could a family that served something this amazing be all bad? September 1st, 1991. It was nearing 11 o'clock in the morning, and Linda was already tired of this odd situation. Since their arrival 30 minutes before, no fewer than 10 wizards had bowed to her husband, as though he were royalty. Many of them bestowed a sweeping bow upon her and Hermione as well. To call it disconcerting was an understatement. "What the bloody hell is going on?" she whispered to Richard, her face clenched in a smile. "I don't know, just go with it," he said, an equally wide grin plastered on his own face. "Maybe they really like meeting new people. Some of these folks look as though they haven't left the house since Queen Victoria died." It was true. Though there were plenty of young people and their parents milling about in Muggle attire, or robes that could pass as overcoats on the streets of London, there were several men who wore ruffled shirts with brocade jackets, and women in high-necked dresses. "Does that dress have a bustle?" Linda whispered incredulously. Richard turned to look, but was waved off by his wife. "No, don't look, love. She'll think you're staring at her ass." "Well, it probably builds muscle to carry around that bustle," Richard joked. "Could be worth staring at." "Stop it," Linda giggled. Hermione ran up to them, her dark school robes billowing. "Mum and Dad, an older boy showed me where to load my trunk. Can you come help me lift it up?" "Sure, Crabcake." Richard followed his daughter, removing his jacket as he walked. He helped another father, a balding, red-haired man with glasses, who appeared to be loading several trunks himself. When they'd finished, he turned to shake the man's hand. As they had been loading the trunks, the man appeared friendly, making conversation about the fact that he had 4 children going to Hogwarts this year, whilst next year it would be 5. But now the man drew back with a look of uncertainty. "Oh, pardon me. What a peculiar mark that is." The man gestured to Richard's arm, where his service tattoo was inked. "Oh, that, yes. I was in the service." "The service?" the man asked, sounding a bit distrustful. "Yes, the British Army. I was a medic back in the day, before becoming a dentist." "Oh, you're a Muggle!" Where before the man had appeared standoffish, now he looked like a child on Christmas morning. "How wonderful!" Quite, I suppose." Richard wasn't sure what to say, but once again he was amazed that this group of people who seemed so insular and withdrawn from ordinary society could be so welcoming. "Magical folk really seem to like us, I take it?" It was the man's turn to look a bit befuddled. "I'm pleased to hear you say that. Relations between the magical and Muggle worlds haven't always been the best. I'm glad to know that you've received a warm reception. Arthur Weasley." The ginger-haired man held out a hand. "Richard Granger." "Arthur!" a woman bellowed from 3 cars down the platform. "Excuse me. It was wonderful meeting you." And with that, Arthur hurried away to find his wife. Richard turned to look for Linda and Hermione, only to find his path blocked by Lucius Malfoy. "Ah, Lucius, good to see you," he said, holding out a hand. Lucius shook it with a small bow, which Richard returned awkwardly. "I see you've met Arthur Weasley." Lucius sneered slightly. "You two not get along?" "We've had words. Arthur works for the Ministry of Magic. He seems to feel that the government should be allowed to enter one's home and snoop around with little provocation or reason." "Ah, geez. Kind of power-hungry, is that right?" Lucius smiled warmly. "Yes. Happens to the best of them. They go into things with the best of intentions, but get lost along the way, I suppose." Lucius nodded, then asked, "And how is young Miss Granger this morning? Ready to take on the magical world?" "Oh, yes. She's most excited." "Good. Ah, here's Narcissa with Draco." "Dearest, you recall Lord Granger?" Lucius said smoothly to his approaching wife. "Lord Granger, we just wanted to say once again how honoured we were to host you in our home, and to assure you that Draco and his friends will do all they can to protect Hermione whilst she's at Hogwarts." Narcissa finished. Draco hung back, breathing hard at this promise. He understood that this Muggle had performed special operations for the Dark Lord, but he was uncertain how much part he wanted to take in any such missions. Hermione Granger was smart, that was certain, but was she also cunning, ruthless, dangerous? Still, Draco could not deny that there was something interesting about the girl. She seemed to already know the incantations for dozens of spells. She rattled off the names and uses of several potions at dinner weeks before, and she seemed interested in everything magical. Everything he had to say, everything about his house, all whilst possessing so much knowledge already. It was, frankly, a bit scary and exciting. A part of Draco was afraid to spend time around her, and another part was afraid not to, lest she not notice him. "Assure you that Draco and his friends will do all that they can to protect Hermione while she's at Hogwarts," Mrs. Malfoy was saying as Hermione and her mother approached. Hermione's eyes went wide. First of all, it sounded as though Draco's mother thought Hogwarts was dangerous. Why would she need protection? And second of all, was Draco planning to hang around her? Hermione had always been smart. That much was clear. It was made obvious to her not just by her parents from a young age, but by other children. Smarty Pants, teacher's pet, Little Miss Know-it-all, Brainiac, Swatty Dotty. She'd been called all manner of mean-spirited monikers in her life, and whilst some of that builds character, most of it just hurt. She could count her friends on one hand. Jacob, a neighbour boy, a year younger than her, had always been kind and friendly. Her parents' best friends had a daughter near her age, and Allison was usually willing to play with Barbies or roller skate together whilst their parents visited. In school, she usually sat with Courtney and Lara to eat lunch. They were friends with each other and didn't mind occasionally including her in their conversations. But Hermione had no one her own age that she could call to pour out her troubles. There was no one in the world who, when asked to name their closest friends, would think to name Hermione Granger. And Draco, despite his eccentricities and general air of distrust regarding Muggle things, seemed like a nice person. He was smart, and he knew a lot about the wizarding world. He also seemed to have lots of friends. People gravitated to him, whether it was his good looks or his confident manner. "You will?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Of course," Draco said brusquely. Then at his father's stern look he elaborated, "It would be my honour." Oh. Mr. Malfoy was forcing him to do this, then. Draco's father was on the Board of Governors for Hogwarts. This was likely some kind of Muggle integration program, a buddy system to match Muggleborns with purebloods in an effort to help them fit in. Still, beggars couldn't be choosers, and perhaps Draco and his friends would come to like her in time. In any case, his smile went all the way to his eyes, and it was friendly, even if forced. Her parents shook hands and exchanged bows with the Malfoys once more, then turned to her as they walked away. "Please, be safe, and have fun at school. We know you'll do an excellent job at studying, but take time to get to know your classmates. You'll be spending time with them for the next 7 years, after all," her mother reminded her as she hugged her close. Hermione's father gave her one last hug. "We love you, Crabcake. Go and do great things, and don't forget to write to us." The train whistle blew behind them. Now that the moment of departure was close, Hermione's stomach was in knots. Was it too late to turn back, to just leave, go back home to the comfort of Hampstead? Seeing her look of worry and indecision, Richard ran a hand over her hair and kissed her forehead. "Crabcake? What is a witch's favourite insect?" Hermione smiled.
pushing back the lump in her throat, and wiping away the tear that threatened to fall down her cheek. "A spelling bee." "Right in one," Richard chuckled.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great 78.